What does it matter why we think about Christ and culture and what that means for Christ followers?
There's some really strong religious traditions that have a lot of set of norms and values and practices that maybe feel like a culture in and of themselves.
He went out of his way to be with the outcasts, the tax collector.
It's interesting what that comment implies in terms of particular behaviors
Right.
or activities that are Christian or not.
Seems like culture then is kind of this convergence of where our interests and passions combine with our values and our worldview.
And I think that's a challenge that the church and those of faith in Jesus Christ have wrestled with for millennia now.
Hello, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Faith, Life, and Learning podcast from Los Angeles Pacific University. LAPU is a Christian university that believes in a holistic approach to learning and to faith. In these conversations, we hope to explore how faith impacts all aspects of our lives. Whether you are already a part of the LAPU community or a guest, we are glad you are here, and we hope you enjoy the conversation.
Welcome, everyone, LAPU, to another Faith, Life, and Learning podcast for the spring 2025 semester. My name's Andrew Lindstrom, and we'll be talking today about the topic of Christ in culture. And we're going to be specifically investigating a passage of scripture called the Beatitudes, which, if you're familiar, is when Jesus begins his Sermon on the Mount with a series of statements. So welcome again, everyone. Let's start with the question, what does culture actually mean? That's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and I don't know that we've actually know exactly what it is.
Yeah, culture can mean all sorts of things, I think. I think of the things my kids are into, Taylor Swift and video games, and I think of the stuff that, whether it's movies or books or music, politics, fashion, culture just encompasses also, I think, the work that we do, the kind of beliefs and values that we have. That cultures are varied across societies and time. So it's a very kind of fluid thing that's always changing, and I don't know if we can always get our hands around it because it's always changing. You know, Taylor Swift has a different pop song every day that's popular. Yeah, I just think that it makes up all these different elements of our lives, kind of on a broad scale.
And I think of culture on varied degrees of breadth, in that my family has its culture, our norms and traditions that are ours, but are maybe unique to the development of me, my wife, my children. Then we have institutional culture, Los Angeles Pacific University, the faculty, staff, and student. There's a dynamic and expectations and norms and traditions even within our organization. There's regional culture. I'm from this part of the country. We have our sayings and our favorite dishes, or there's national culture, norms. I mean, you could just sort of keep expanding the circle and trying to summarize what are the elements that are common amongst us. So like you're saying, Brant, it depends on the framework for what you're setting up and looking at as culture.
Yeah, that's
what
good.
Circle are you looking at?
Yeah, I like your expanding circle. I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, I see it as like now that we're just getting into Happy Chinese New Year, everyone. Mm-hmm. That's an example of Chinese culture. And for me, culture is like a set of traditions that a group agrees upon. I guess that's a very formal one. But I think even within each married couple has their own culture. That's sort of like what Micah was saying. And each teacher, as she teaches her class, creates their own culture. And no two classes have the same culture.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's interesting also to think about. I think culture gets thrown around a lot in a really broad term. You know, you can hear we're in a cultural moment or a cultural crisis. And when I think about and hear about those broad terms, I do think that's helpful. But also, you know, for example, the Super Bowl's coming up, and that's going to be a huge cultural moment. Millions and millions of people are going to participate in that. And then a lot of people aren't. You know, if you're not into football and you're not into the Super Bowl or you don't care about it, then I wonder if, you know, you kind of feel left out, or maybe you don't care that you feel left out. But it's interesting how our our media, and we have this idea of pop culture where there's this popularized version of what culture is. Yeah, and I wonder how that plays into also how we feel like we're engaged in culture, if we feel like we're not part of some of the bigger things that are going on.
Yeah, it seems like culture then is kind of this convergence of where our interests and passions combine with our values and our worldview, and then plays out in the things that we do and the experiences that we share with other people around us. That dovetails maybe well into a next thought, which is, why does this matter when we're thinking about our walk with Christ? What does it matter why we think about Christ and culture and what that means for Christ followers?
Yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes we can compartmentalize where different parts of our lives engage with culture. And I think particularly there's some really strong religious traditions that have a lot of set of norms and values and practices that maybe feel like a culture in and of themselves. And maybe that feels separate from the Super Bowl. You go to your church service and it has its own things, and then you leave and you have a Super Bowl party, and kind of you don't think about any kind of intersection between those two. And so I think as we're talking about this question of Christ in culture, how does Christ meet us in culture? It's important to think about how we view and understand God and Jesus, and if there's a place in our faith to conceptualize that Jesus can actually be in all these different parts of culture and all these different parts of life. And how does that work? And what do we do with that, if that's the case?
I think that what Jesus has to do with culture is to behave like Jesus, to teach people to model his style of leadership, to rather than think about yourself, but to random acts of kindness, paying it forward. I think that you can interweave Christ into more polite behavior when you are out there in the culture. And I think that's one way in which you can integrate Christ into your daily life. Instead of always thinking about yourself, insulting everybody, thinking that anybody that's just a little bit different than you should just avoid that person, because Christ did not do that. He went out of his way to be with the outcasts, the tax collector. Nobody liked the tax collector, for instance. And
nobody likes the tax collector.
And I think that it's to have Christ in your life is more like being like Christ and integrating that into whatever culture you are in.
So that's a great thought that I'd like to piggyback on as we wrap up this question. Should it then be clear, as Brant was saying, you might not always see intersectionality between your walk with Christ and this other thing that you might be doing. Should it be clear? Should it be something that the greater church should be aspiring toward, is that the Christians in the world are influencing culture and that other people know that Christians are around them at the Super Bowl party and they feel that impact? Should that be something that we're striving towards, or no?
Yeah, that's a good question. We need very Christian Super Bowl parties. I don't know if those would be very fun, but
well, hopefully the snacks are still good.
It's interesting what that comment implies in terms of particular behaviors, or activities that are Christian or not. And I think that's a challenge that the church and those of faith in Jesus Christ have wrestled with for millennia now. Is what does that mean in terms of I follow this teaching, and what does that mean for how I live out my life? Can it be easily boiled down to codified things that this equals good, this equals bad, this is right, this is wrong? And maybe to some point, but I think as we continue this conversation into looking at the beatitudes, even it's not meant to be necessarily that specific, but about the experiences and the attitude and the authentic heart in which we approach things.
Yeah.
And like Yvonne was saying, even Jesus was disrupting the norms of the religious culture, the social and religious culture that he was living in his time by associating with people that the culturally proclaimed righteous of their day would never dare think to associate with.
Yeah.
And he would show compassion on them and share a meal with them and discuss the challenges of the life that they faced and challenge them to be more and to change.
Yeah, one of the things I think about is how we can engage in a way that actually might transform the culture. And not necessarily transform it into a particular, like, so that it looks explicitly a certain Christian way, for example. But I think about how for the first miracle that Jesus did when he was at the wedding in Cana and he transformed water into wine. And he was engaging in this cultural tradition of this wedding. He was there, he was part of it and celebrating it, and they were out of wine, and he did this miracle and continued to transform even the party in front of him in a way that I think honored the people that were there, and really an act of love and not condemning or shutting down or saying party's over, but engaging and transforming in a way that's really life-giving. And so when I think about how we can be called to engage in culture, I think about what would it mean to be engaged in things where my relationship and understanding of Jesus and of God's work in the world is ultimately pointing people towards hope and towards redemption and seeing them where they are and possibly doing some exciting and radical things that help people see and experience Jesus in a new and a fresh way.
And what I'm hearing is also that the Christian Super Bowl party is going to be fun and good.
Yeah, I hope so.
It's super fascinating, right? When you look at different aspects of the Christian movement over the past several millennia, and you see different parts of it, like, there was the Jewish sect of the Essenes, I think, that retreated into places secretively and kind of wrote down some of their scrolls and things of that nature. So you see it in the Jewish movement in ancient history. You of course see the Christian monastic movement of monasteries, retreating away in search of finding God in places where they're kind of tucked away from the world.
Solitude, away from
solid. And it's interesting because those movements have had impact still on the world. That's what I find interesting too. It's not like those movements have not been felt. There's been a ripple effect on how to meditate on the presence of God and how to meet him in quiet. And that's been something that we see as beautiful now. And I think we owe it to a lot of our monastic, fathers and mothers who have gone before and kind of showed how to do that well. So
sometimes we need to retreat in order to be able to engage, right? Yeah.
Jesus did that a lot.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
There you go. How many times did he wake up and go on top of the mountain and pray?
He went on 40 days without eating, and I believe he was without people as well.
Yeah. I think that's a great point to wrap up that thought. We need to retreat and rest in order to re-engage.
Thanks for listening to the Faith, Life, and Learning podcast from Los Angeles Pacific University. If you enjoy these conversations and would like to hear more, please subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the subscribe button. For more information about Los Angeles Pacific University, please visit our website at lapu.edu. Learn and live fully.